Hey there, folks. This is Cross here, clocking in a little bit on this episode to just give a brief explainer. So, you are not going to be hearing today the Hero of Ages finale that we had recorded with Michelle from the 17th Shard. Instead, I've got a little episode for you from PJ's Symposium of Media and Whimsy, here to fill its place. To give you a brief explainer on what exactly happened, Riverside, the company that we use to do some of our remote recordings with guests, ended up having a big kind of error to the point of the CEO coming out and apologizing for it. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get the fixed and repaired audio in time for the release. And supposedly, we should be getting it sometime in the next day or two. And at that point, when I receive the kind of fixed and repaired audio, we will get that out to you. So be it Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whatever, you'll have that bonus episode, and Alloy of Law and everything else will be completely on track. Again, totally apologize, but here's a little taste of one of our Patreon bonus shows that you can get at the bartender or mixologist tier. So this is just a little taste of PJ's Symposium of Media and Whimsy. We hope you enjoy it. And like I said, we will be back next week with both the first episode of Alloy of Law and, fingers crossed, the Era 1 wrap-up with the 17th Shard. See you guys on the other side.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to PJ's Symposium of Media and Whimsy, a very fun show where I get to drag Crossland through shit rather than the other way around. I'm one of your hosts, PJ.
Hey there, this is Cross, and welcome to Words and Whiskey, a podcast about media and whimsy. Just kidding. We're going to be talking about Sons of Ares, the comic books by Pierce Brown today, both of them all at once. Because we keep saying this at the end of every podcast and then going with a different guest that has finally gotten back to us for timing. Yep,
you're a dick. That's not what we're talking about today.
Today what do you mean?
Did you watch The Wrong Thing?
I watched the comic book, and the comic book did not move. Let me tell you what. It was a really slow 2 hours.
Today, we are talking about another movie that Crossland hasn't actually seen.
But I have now.
He has now. That's true. But I consider it to be one of my favorite films. It's Wes Anderson's The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. I think we're going to hit on a lot of the big story beats and overarching concepts, and spark some conversation with some quotes throughout the film. So that's kind of the way I've structured this. It's very loosey-goosey compared to our other notes usually, but, we'll see how it goes.
That's acceptable and reasonable. Might I lead off with, before we talk about anything else, how funny it is that Ned's name is an N and Zissou is a Z, and like the different like Z and N, it's a sideways, and it feels very intentional.
It works out for the flag at the end.
Yeah. It ends up working out exactly as it should.
Well, except for the deaths.
That's, fair point.
Before we
Murders.
actually dive too deep into this, though, let's get into some cocktail cock. What you drinking this fine afternoon?
I am having an old-fashioned today. This is just very straightforward. It's been a very busy day. Spent the better part of 4 hours today streaming with Adam for charity for Extra Life, recorded an episode of Hard Pan this morning with Andrew, and now here I am recording the last thing of the day, the episode of PJ's Symposium with you. So
yeah, perfect.
And in between, you know what I did? I watched Steve Zissou, Life Aquatic. That's been my entire day.
There you go. Any beer to follow it up, or just the old fashioned?
Just a thickum old fashioned. It's thick. I don't have any beer in the house at the moment. I have not had time to go shopping. It's been very busy this weekend.
It's all good.
You say that. What are you drinking?
I wanted to make a cocktail mentioned in the show, or in the movie, called a rum cannonball, but I didn't have any of the ingredients for any of the recipes I found online. So instead, I made a cocktail that I'm sure exists, but I don't know what the name of it is, so I'm calling it the Belafonte. It is 2 ounces of white rum, an ounce of triple sec, half an ounce of simple syrup, the juice of half a lime, so about an ounce, I guess, probably. Mm-hmm. 3 dashes of orange bitters, a splash of orange juice, all of that shaken. I served it over a big ice cube because tiki shit, and so it stays cold throughout the episode. And then garnished it with 2 cocktail cherries representing the research dolphins. So
excellent. I had maraschinos. I should have dumped 2 in here for the turtles, but you know,
there you go.
That would have been good.
I am following that up with a double IPA from Transient Ale, Artesian Ales called Ultra Moist. So it doesn't give me a whole lot of information other than that. I'm not sure what the hop bill is. It's 8% ABV, 1 pint, cool blue pattern.
Okay.
And that's about it. So that's what I've got following the Belafonte.
The Belafonte.
The Belafonte.
Excelente.
With that, I think we'll start talking about the film. First and foremost, what did you think of the movie? Overall.
Before we do that, you son of a bitch, every time we got to do the summary. So,
yes,
Life Aquatic, The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, directed by Wes Anderson, written by Wes Anderson and Noah Baumbach. Our summary here is renowned oceanographer Steve Zissou, played by Bill Murray, has sworn vengeance upon the rare shark that devoured a member of his crew. In addition to his regular team, he is joined on his boat by Ned, Owen Wilson, a man who believes Zissou to be his father, and Jane, Cate Blanchett, a journalist pregnant by a married man. They travel the sea all too often, running into pirates and, perhaps more traumatically, various figures from Zissou's past, including his estranged wife, Eleanor, played by Angelica Huston. Interestingly enough, I feel like the summary actually... Okay, incredibly hard to summarize this movie. I do not behoove whoever had to try to write that. But, I mean... Eleanor is everywhere in the story variously. Like, she pops up all the time, but I would say that, like, it's almost disingenuous to say that, like, she's a traumatic figure from his past, although she does bring up a lot of his kind of fuck ups and mistakes over the course of the movie. So there are components there.
It's more like he's a traumatic character of her past, and she got fed up and left halfway through the movie. I don't know if I'd call her estranged even at this point.
Yeah, estranged feels... I mean,
what else do you say though?
The passage of time is also very loosey-goosey in this movie.
That's true.
Like, you can't tell if it's all happening over the course of like a day or what. Like, there are moments where we'll go from like the ship and we have to go to like go raid this thing, and then it's like set sail, and like all of a sudden we're there, and it's like, well, how did that take any time? Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about right away. We'll talk about that maybe later. But yeah, first and foremost, did I like the movie? Was that the first question?
So I feel like we've talked about Wes's work before, Wes Anderson's other films, and I know you like those, but I don't know if you've ever... I know you haven't seen this, so I have no idea what you're expecting going into this and whether or not you actually enjoyed it.
So this is an interesting question, right? Because you had actually called me earlier today, probably to ask, some general thoughts about how I felt about the movie, and instead I quoted the line that was just said to me back to you, about including him on the flag, including Klaus on the flag. Anyway, so in the end, at the very end of this movie, the end of this movie was actually very cathartic in a lot of ways that I wasn't expecting. But I'll get back around to it. Did I enjoy this movie in comparison to other Wes Anderson movies? Yes, and it feels like it is an earlier project in his life, but at the same time, it feels so good and interesting that I have a tough time discerning like where I'd even place it inside of my headcanon for Wes Anderson. Did I like it? Yeah. Was it perfectly funny all the time? No. Was the beginning slower on average than a lot of Wes Anderson? More so than a lot of the other ones that I've seen. So
that's fair.
But it did reward a rewatch at the beginning, and you kind of have a better understanding of Zissou's character. I just don't feel like we get a good grasp of him right away. As to how like floundering and flubby he really is. He seems self-serious, and you kind of take him as like, oh, so you are a serious guy. And then you kind of get into the character more, and it's like, oh, you're a fuck up who doesn't even know the difference between a jellyfish and a man of war. Like, you don't know anything. You documentarian oceanographer that's worthless, basically.
When Eleanor leaves, he's like, who's going to remember all the Latin names for all the fishes and shit? I can't remember all of that.
Yeah, and the fact that Eleanor paid for like all of the library on the inside of the ship too, and like made sure that it was all stocked up with everything, over the course, it just shows it feeds into sort of his ignorance, and that ends up being the point, really. Like that ends up kind of being a core thing with his character, is sort of the it's not really a midlife crisis, but sort of a middle age creative depression or like end of career kind of thing, and that makes for a very interesting conversation. In the end, I did really enjoy the movie. I think it will only get funnier with time. There are also other lines that are just straight up not funny now. There's some true. There's some very clear, like, Wes Anderson does shock with lines from time to time with like sort of their clarity, and it's also to give you a sense of the character. And in hindsight, once we're done with the movie, we get kind of a jabby joke that the reason that he was making kind of the gay jokes the way that he was because he himself identifies as a little bit gay, and so it's like, okay, that just makes it different, not necessarily better. Yeah, but that's not the biggest. It's not the biggest complaint or criticism. It just felt the most poorly aged of the whole thing. But
yeah, I wouldn't even say. I guess yes. That's probably the biggest point. There is a line towards the end where Allie is saying something about like, well, that's because I'm partially gay. Yeah. And Zissou responds with, well, supposedly we all are.
Right.
Which I feel like redeems it a little bit, but
yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get at there, is like, I think that's the intent, is to kind of make up, because it's mostly him that's making the jokes, so it makes it is character centric in its own way, but it's not,
right.
Yeah. That said, like, there are tons of funny moments. There are tons of like perfect one-liners. There's some, obviously Wes Anderson has some very stark filmography techniques that are very kind of unique and impressionistic to him. This movie had them, and then at the same time had entire scenes that I actually can't believe that Wes Anderson shot, because they didn't seem like a Wes Anderson. Like there were portions of this, like the entire hotel bit is shot like an action movie all of a sudden.
Yeah, and
it's like, whoa, that's a jarring change. I can't believe that like you can do that. But also, it's well done.
Good on you.
Yeah.
So you made a point earlier today on our phone call that I had heard this comment before, but I'd never actually dug into it.
Yes.
That this is Wes Anderson's movie about movie making, film about filmmaking. And that, to me, looking at it from that sort of perspective, makes a lot of sense. With essentially especially the beginning scene of Steve in the audience with them kind of hating his film, and him having kind of a crisis about it, and his progression through to the point where at the end of the film, it seems like the film does well. He's got like an Oscar style trophy, and he's just sitting outside, doesn't give a shit, takes Werner on his shoulders for a piggyback ride, and just walks down the street without any sort of fanfare.
Yeah. Leaves the trophy.
Yeah, leaves the trophy.
Yeah.
Notably. So,
yeah, and that's where like the movie really, that's where I said like this movie ended very cathartically, where I felt that release, and I was like, oh shit, that's great. That's a great like character arc for him independently, which is interesting because this movie is also a series of vignettes, and I do want to get back to the movie making thing that we brought up, kind of but this movie is a series of vignettes, right? And there are different scenes, different moments. As much of a spine of this movie can be defined as like the quasi father-son relationship that happens between Ned and Steve, and sort of Steve realizing what he was missing. You could also say that if we transpose the filmmaking lens on it, an idea is kind of like Ned is an idea. It's a part of the creative process. Steve becomes obsessed with that idea, fights with that idea, figures out ways to make that idea work for him, and it sometimes pushes back and works against him. And then in the end, it's death when it's completed, when everything is said and done. It is not fully rewarding for him, but he's learned something and other people appreciate it. And that's sort of the filmmaking lens, so far as I can understand it, without even talking about the obvious like search for funding and some of the other stuff that is very like surface. Like if you view the story as like Steve is the writer or director, and you view Ned as the project or the spark of inspiration that arrives at his doorstep, or the idea, that's how you can view the lens there.
I'm sure there's something to be said about the death of that idea as well.
Yeah, eventually, like you have to give up at some point. Like you can't just keep editing something forever. It has to come out eventually.
But specifically with Ned dying, if we're going to make that comparison, with Ned dying as kind of the culmination of the end of the project, like I don't think he completes that project properly without Ned's help and ultimately his demise.
Well, I think so. Depends on if we're talking about the metaphor or the physical movie.
I'm trying to tie it to the metaphor.
Yeah. Okay. So the metaphor is that the end of the story that Steve was setting out with, like Ned, this spark of inspiration, the idea, the story that he wanted to tell, he thought was going to end with him finding the shark. But actually, the story really ended when Ned died. That's when the idea was finished, and he didn't realize that he was going to be drugged in that direction. You can, as a writer, as a creative, you can set out with the idea of my story is going to end with the ring being thrown in the volcano. But you might get to the volcano and realize this isn't satisfactory enough. I need to change things, right? And so, other things might have changed along the way. And so your end result, your goalpost moves a little bit, and maybe that finish line is somewhere else. In this case, I think that, for Steve, as the creative or whoever you want to put inside of those shoes, he didn't expect for this turn to make so much sense and then to be like the celebrated thing. Because the celebration in this movie is not that of finding the shark. It is the life of Ned.
Yeah.
It's like the entire piece kind of changes that way, which, interesting.
It is.
So one of the things that I did want to bring up, at the very least from my side of the equation, is you mentioned earlier comparing this to other Wes Andersons that I've seen and watched and kind of considered over the years, because I do like Wes Anderson. I should say I often enjoy Wes Anderson, I guess. Like there's a tough... Some movies are really good and some movies are really tough but are good. Like I don't find myself almost always or ever rewatching Wes Anderson films, with the exception of Fantastic Mr. Fox. Anyway,
okay.
Needless to say, back to this. One of the things that a lot of other Wes Anderson movies do very well is they take a bunch of vignettes and then they tie them all together variously over the course of the story or in different elements. And there's a lot of like cutting between things, even if it's just to expose something that might later be used as a dialogue point for a different character. I think of like Grand Budapest Hotel has a ton of those moments throughout the story where it's really just about those like individual scenes kind of laying out the life of the hotel and the kind of bellboy that interstitializes most of the story. This movie... Almost, there are a series of vignettes that we kind of hop between in Steve Zissou's life. And it feels like this movie almost tries to stand too upright and doesn't have enough vignettes to kind of cut between. It's almost trying too hard to be a regular movie. And then when it cuts to a vignette, it pulls me at, like it weirds me out in a weird way.
Okay.
It feels imperfect. It feels like it either needed more vignettes or less. And that's like my only really big critique, is that it didn't commit to the weird enough that I would kind of not expect, but like would build up a Wes Anderson movie in the same way. And obviously, we have to think about an artist's career, and we can't go back and like compare the 2018 versus the 2005. That's not fair. Or oh God, not 18. That had to be like, Grand Budapest had to be like 15, right? Or 14, maybe? A while ago. Yeah, regardless,
somewhere in there.
Yeah, it feels like it just needs a small tweak in either direction. And I'm not sure what though. Not sure what.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I really enjoy those little moments of seeing the Steve Zissou show, or whatever it's actually called.
Mm-hmm.
The Steve Zissou show, I guess, it's only mentioned by Klaus when he's like accosting Ned for like butting in too much. So I think that's what it's probably referred to as, but who knows? Yeah, I never really thought about that because I know this movie so well, but yes, I think there's not enough of them. And I am wanting for more. So I'm with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's also interesting to me is that this movie is one of the few films that are co-written by Noah Baumbach that he's done. Noah Baumbach is a screenwriter from New York, married to Greta Gerwig, who's a crazy screenwriter as well. Both of them are known for something called mumblecore as a style of writing, where it's less immediately verbose, and like characters can kind of go into like their own like kind of quiet internal monologue, and that happens a couple of times inside of Zissou, which is kind of why I bring it up here. You know, you might have a character like talk to themselves a little bit in a very kind of quiet, mumbly, life is real kind of way. He also co-wrote Fantastic Mr. Fox with Wes Anderson, so there's kind of that overlap between the two. But it's also an and, so they worked together on it, which is interesting to think that they kind of built the story together. And I think that I could even go so far as to pick out the characters that I think that Noah Baumbach had a bigger hand in, because I think Wes Anderson is much weirder than Noah is. And like a lot of Ned's dialogue and Jane's are both a little bit crisper and like more clearly spoken, wherein Zissou is just fucking off the wall. And it's not just his character, it's also his wife, Eleanor, similarly is off the wall. And it feels like those two, that feels like based on all the scripts that I've read. Noah Baumbach, you might also know for Marriage Story, released in 2019 or whatever. Big old Netflix movie, won some Oscar awards. That's cool. It's that whole, have you seen the scene of like Adam Driver like yelling and looking like he's crying, and then he like punches a wall? Okay, well, it's funny, kind of. Okay. It was a big meme for a bit,
gotcha.
Because it looked fake, but it was very real. Yeah. Gotcha. So anyway, the kind of point there being is that I feel like even you might be able to point more directly at the fact that Noah Baumbach was more involved with this project as to why it has more of a vertical spine, as opposed to it being a little bit more vignette and disconnected. Because I also feel that way about Fantastic Mr. Fox. There are fewer vignettes. They're more like Fantastic Mr. Fox treats them more like, I know I'm going on diatribe here and splitting up the story. They're more like Family Guy sketches in Fantastic Mr. Fox, where it just like blips away for a little bit and you see like the internal life of someone else like fucking around like a different set of animals, and then you cut back like in the baseball game and stuff like that. That's more, those are more contained.
Right.
These are a little bit more contained, but they can go on a little bit longer. Those are some thoughts.
So
that's a bunch of vomit.
What would you consider to be the tour of the Belafonte? Would you consider that a vignette? Because I noticed something really strange about it in this this watch through, in that it feels like he's addressing the audience until the end when Ned starts talking to him and asking him who Jacqueline is or what happened to Jacqueline.
I do think that it is intended to be a vignette, and then that's where it cuts back to reality, right? Like that's one of the things that this movie does simultaneously better and just different. I wouldn't even call it worse, just different, is that a lot of the time in Grand Budapest Hotel, Moonrise Kingdom, there's just like hard cuts. Like a vignette ends and you flip into the next one, you get a new title card, you get a new moment. And that's not always the case here. There are those moments that happen with new title cards, but yeah.
I think in this case, almost every single time, the characters are watching the vignette.
Yes, because they're also actively filming or taking part. Right. So there's a fourth, either they're watching the film or they're a part of the film. And so there's like an awareness thing where like the characters know that they're being filmed, for the documentary inside of the movie, which is then like an extra layer of how do I take this person's attitude about this? Are they acting that way because they know that they're being filmed, or are they acting that way because they're quirky in general? And more often than not, I think it's because they know that they're being filmed and they're reacting that way. Okay. Only a handful of people. I would say Zissou and Ned, for the most part, are outside of that spectrum. But a lot of the other crew like act weird when the camera's on them, but otherwise act fairly normal.
Yeah, that's fair.
What was the cameraman's name? God, he was great. He was so funny.
Oh man,
there's so many lines directed towards him. Vikram. The snaps.
The snapping is something that's not quite as prevalent as the like snap and whistle from Fantastic Mr. Fox, but you do notice it quite a bit as like kind of the thing from Zissou when he's addressing other people.
Yeah. The one that got me was when they're underwater, and obviously this gets into kind of the father-son thing, but when Ned is addressing Steve and they're going back and forth with the nicknames, right? But he snaps underwater, and it doesn't make an underwater snap when everything else in the scene is very clearly dictated by the sound as it would travel underwater. But the snap sounds like a normal above air snap. And I'm like, you went through all of the effort and you intentionally did that. You had to have intentionally did that, you motherfucker. You're so specific about all of the other details inside of the scene, including explaining a radio sequence. This is deadpan for a joke. This is deadpan for that joke.
Absolutely. It has to be.
I was simultaneously laughing and smiling and enraged. You made me try to understand so hard what they were saying with that scuba gear on, and then you just snap like it's nothing because it's fucking movie magic, you asshole. I was also smiling though. Like I said, it was like a happy rage moment.
Speaking of the underwater scenes though, and stylistic choices, I don't think I even planned on bringing this up, but because we've been talking so much about Fantastic Mr. Fox, what did you think about the style choice to have a lot of the sea life to be essentially claymation?
PJ, do you know who did it?
No.
Do you know who did the animation? It is no less than the guy that we spent a lot of time 2 weeks ago talking about, Henry Selick, the director of Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach and Coraline.
All right.
Did all of the claymation stop motion in this film.
That's awesome.
Yep. When I saw that pop up in the credits, I was like, that's the same guy. And then I looked it up and I was like, yep, it is the same guy. Cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I always liked it.
Yeah.
But I never understood the choice to do it that way. It was fun, but
to me, it feels more metaphorical. It feels more like a metaphor, right? Because it feels completely different from the film metaphor. But the sort of sea life metaphor is that a lot of sea life is unknown. You know, like there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to, you know, exploring the sea and all of these different things. So all of the different creatures that we see are these oddly named creatures that do not exist in reality, that might have different behaviors that we don't understand, like the crayon seahorse thing.
That exists, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure
really?
That's a real thing.
Then I'm completely wrong. But I thought that it was intended to be kind of a play.
Oh, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't.
That's what I
exist.
thought. I was like, I thought it was all meant to be, because I didn't. Yeah. The crab was really odd. The man-o-war was real, but that was a real creature on the beach. Like those were supposed to look real. But all the claymation stuff, I think, was intended, including like the jaguar shark, to give it this larger than life or more dramatic than regular life feel to it.
So there is one exception to that. There's the claymation gecko that he like flicks off his hand when he's meeting with Eleanor at the summer home of
But
Allie
I still think that's like
Hennessy.
Fantastical, you know? Like, does
suppose.
he call it a gecko? Like,
no, he just looks at it on his hand and flicks it away.
Yeah. So I guess like that's still meant to be. It's still meant to be like that documentarian oddity, you know?
Okay.
Like, I think about Planet Earth. There's so like half of the joy of watching Planet Earth is all the weird creatures that you don't know, that you've never seen before.
Planet Earth.
Yeah, I fucking love Planet Earth. I still get surprised. I've watched it like 3 times. It's a long series. There's like 24 hours of that shit. But, you know, like every time I love the fucking frogs. I love the weird birds with the weird dances. You know, that's the shit. Yeah. So this is that inside of its own story, right? Like this is his moment where he gets to be Steve Irwin and like present something to us that's unique and weird. And then he does it wrong because he doesn't fucking know anything.
And the journalist like corrects him. Like that's the Portuguese man of war.
Yeah.
Or no, it's a different man of war, I think.
No, I think it was called the Portuguese man of war.
Okay.
And then he says, "Oh, it is a man of war."
Yep.
How didn't you know that? And he looks at someone else and blames them for it. Or maybe he says something like, "Oh, if only we would have had Eleanor around." I think that's what he said. Yeah, I would have known if I would have had Eleanor around. Something like that.
Right.
Perfectly saucy.
So good.
Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to bring up to you, maybe, and this makes some sense. There's like a focus on, and I think this gets into kind of the idea of like being like past your prime, right? Which is where we find Zissou in this story. But like all of the various infidelity in this story and sort of the various relationship or sexual undertones throughout it. What'd you make of the whole thing? What'd you make of that? I know this is an odd one, but I've been thinking about it. It
is an odd one, and it's there, and it's like right behind the focus the entire time. And all I can think of is it's something kind of at the forefront of the writers, plural, lives at the moment. Whoever it is writing those different pieces, because it's not cohesive enough to really make an impact on the story so much, but it is always there thematically.
Yeah, I mean, infidelity is a huge part of Zissou's life as it stands, right? Because it was obviously a huge component for why Ned could potentially be his kid, for why he's on his... I think it's just his second marriage,
it's
right?
His second marriage, but
I think it's just his second marriage.
But even through that, there's the scene right at the beginning after they all leave the showing and the Q&A and stuff, and the woman in the very sparkly dress says hi to him. He tries touching her, says, "Hey, baby." And then Eleanor comes up and is like, why are you doing this to me? And they both walk away.
Yeah.
So like,
and she also says like, "Don't ever touch me again." Yeah.
Yeah. There's a whole lot to it with him. There's Jane in general. He is completely infatuated with from the jump. And that gets really strange with Ned, who is also into her, though pretty much everybody is, including Klaus and some of the other crewmen.
Klaus is fucking hilarious. Klaus is the gem of the entire movie, to be honest.
Klaus is the best.
Klaus is the fucking funniest character for so many reasons. This movie deserves a rewatch just to pay attention and focus in on Klaus. I don't want to skip away from the sexual stuff, but I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
Because so specifically the thing with Steve and all of his various relationships, we learn near the end that he's shooting blanks, right? And so that's kind of great for Eleanor, and that's part of the reason, like, she even makes a joke about, like, experimenting like she's a scientist, and that makes you also question if she was being promiscuous with someone else and then, like, had to abort a pregnancy, maybe. There were some very interesting undertones that I was not sure how to read exactly that scene and moment.
So specifically bringing up
those
the blanks,
moments, I should say,
bringing up the blanks thing. The comment where he's talking about a very, very blunt about it, how she wanted kids. And he's like, well, maybe you were too old at that point when we met. And she said it was worth. I can't remember the quote exactly.
You were probably right all along. We should have had a kid together. Of course, you were kind of already on the edge of being too old. On the edge of being too old, unless maybe that's a cop-out. It's worse than a cop-out. I was 34.
Yeah. So, like, what? First of all, what does that mean? I don't understand that quote, and maybe that's just me being very ignorant.
I think that is intended to say that that's like an early undertone, right? Because how early does that happen? That has to happen.
That happens. I think that happens at Hennessy's villa, so like halfway through the movie.
Oh, okay. So we are still before the overall reveal, but it is when she is with the instructor.
Yeah,
which is clearly a lover. No less that it's not Hennessy, but the fact that it is I think Spanish, maybe Italian lover. Do not recall. Has to be coastal.
I think it might be Portuguese. There's a lot of Portuguese in this film, which I do want to bring that up as well.
Yeah,
just because. Completely side note, but don't let me forget that.
So the lover thing is I think a huge deal for the entire story. I think that it's meant, it's also kind of a blink and you miss it twist, because that happens so quick. The way that she mentions that Steve is shooting blanks and that like Ned couldn't be the kid is so fast. It's literally a line of dialogue. And if you aren't paying attention, like a French movie is sometimes, like if you aren't paying attention, you might miss something that could define an entire relationship for the entire movie.
The first time I watched this, I like looked away for a couple seconds and didn't realize Ned died.
Yeah. I mean, that can happen
it's so
too.
fast.
He dies pretty quick. Like that, the crash happens.
Then they're talking and there's no dramatic change in background music or anything. And then they're at a very short funeral and that's it.
There are two. Want to get back to the sex thing again because I'm not done there. I keep saying sex thing. It's like a marriage thing, whatever, relationship thing. Anyway, with the camera in that scene when he's dying, right? Like you get that like single tear of blood down the screen before the next pan down when the camera goes into the water, and that's when you start to see the blood. But you get a tear before of red, and that's kind of your first real hint that like he's toast. And then it becomes very reminiscent of the first scene where we see Esteban die when the camera dips underwater and it becomes very red.
Mm-hmm.
That was a thing that I caught.
Super subtle, but super well done.
Yeah. It is also, I mean, it is interesting because the first death definitely mattered to Zissou and was important to Zissou, but it was also kind of, he still felt like he had to prove something in some way. And that's where this story also kind of becomes Moby Dick in a way. But
yeah, very much.
Anyway,
so.
Back to Jane, unless you have thoughts on the death.
No, go for it.
Okay. Jane is her own thing right inside of the story in a lot of ways, but I want to talk specifically about, so her editor is the man who impregnated her, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And he's married, but she still sends in paper to him and he responds and sends back notes, but they keep missing each other on the phone, right? Is that kind of the thing? Like there's a weird phone tag thing going on?
I don't think there's even phone tag. I don't think he ever calls her back. I think she's just calling and leaving messages. I don't remember him leaving any messages with her.
I think that she got notes back at one point in the film. I don't think that he left messages. I think you're right. But I think that she got notes back and commented on that on another phone call. Yeah. Basically, very passive aggressive of him. How dare you not respond about our children, but you'll respond about this fucking piece that I'm writing about this documentarian, you asshole. Yeah. I think that was interesting.
That's the read I got on it. I might be.
I think you're right.
There's a lot to miss in this film.
There's so much, which is another thing. Like, way to go, packing this much information into an hour and 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of complexity and depth, which is the thing that I do enjoy about this movie, maybe more than I enjoy about like Budapest even. And this is my issue, right? Like my issue ranking Wes Anderson films is they each are kind of contained in their own little bubbles, and they all have their own interesting kind of traits and tweaks to them. I read a thing when I was done watching the movie that said that this is not Wes Anderson's best movie, but it is his greatest. And I was like, that's an interesting take. And I think it's kind of right in some ways. It's not his best composed movie overall, but you can see where it was going. And it was, yeah,
I can see that.
Yeah.
I think I'd need a more...
You probably
I need to read that
review,
article in order to really understand fully, but I can see the...
It was just making points like Budapest Hotel and Moonrise Kingdom are more complete, and like the Jarlings and, like all of the other Jarling or whatever, however that's pronounced, are more complete films in their own right, and this is like a mostly complete, but like missing a couple of things, but still like telling a more emotionally resonant arc, which I agree with by the end. That was the weird thing. Like I said, I was like, I have to finish this because I don't know why people like this or don't like this. And when I got to the end, I was like, oh yeah, I definitely like this. Like this was a good movie. Because it was just chaos for a while there, man.
It really is. It's really chaos.
What is going on?
So,
God, I'm missing. Oh, go ahead.
No, go for it.
All that I was going to say is I think I missed the only character that we didn't really hit on inside of Ned inside of the relationship triangle with Jane and Steve. Kind of. I mean, Steve is tangential to the triangle. He's it's his own personal arc that he's dealing with, no longer being the hot young oceanographer who could sleep with whoever he wants. But what's his name? Hennessy. First name Al. Is it Al Hennessy?
Alistair
Hennessy. So Jeff Goldblum's character, is very funny, and his relationship with Eleanor is very funny, and his relationship with Zissou is very funny.
His relationship with dogs is not funny.
His relationship with dogs is not funny. I was angry, and also I think that was the intent, was to make you angry and to justify the thievery and everything else that had gone on.
It's also to justify him as the villain.
Yes,
and
yes.
Not even the villain, the foil, I guess.
Yeah, and then he gets shot.
I love that scene.
I fucking love that. I loved that moment. I was like, yeah, shoot him again. Like I almost wanted him to get hit again and then like live anyway.
Steven, are you rescuing me? Fold.
Doesn't he say I guess? No, he says fold. He says fold,
and
then gets shot.
I fold.
He's playing for some reason, I felt like Steve goes. Maybe he shrugs. Maybe that's what he does. It cuts back to him. And he's like,
he just kind of does the sort of head cock.
Yeah, he's like. All of the action scenes too are just fucking hilarious because like no one can shoot.
Yeah, and Klaus is taking cover in front of the vehicle. I was like, someone's going to die this way. Someone's going to die tragically because they don't understand how anything works. Also, they're all strapped the whole fucking movie. Like, they all have guns on their hips. They're oceanographers. What the fuck are you strapped for? That is one of my favorite quotes of this film. Did the interns get Glocks? They all share one.
I must have missed that. There's so many good.
It's when he's trying to give Ned a Glock. He's like, take it. Everybody has one. Hey, what was the name of the script girl?
Anne Marie.
Yeah, Anne Marie. Yeah, because he always says Anne Marie in total, I think.
Yeah,
yeah. I love that so much.
She's funny. I didn't realize that this movie was rated R until the tits showed up, and I was like, whoa, all right, we are in for a very different ride than I thought.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it gets very sweary at that point.
Is never addressed
and not objectified. Like there's no,
not at all.
There's no like. It's just
loved
there.
That. I love that about it because it didn't play into that trope at all.
Yep,
it was great.
Yeah. It feels, again, I think I've made this comparison a couple of times, and I think that Wes Anderson idolizes European cinema, but it feels very French. It feels like a very French move. In a lot of ways. So. He just came out with a new movie, by the way. Did you know that? This is actually kind of timely that we're reviewing this.
Interesting.
I didn't. The French Dispatch came out last week. So
I will have to see that because his last movie was Isle of Dogs, right?
Yes, of which I still haven't seen.
We
talked about reviewing it. But
we talked about doing that for here, and I'm glad we did Life Aquatic better or instead because I liked it better.
Yeah, at the very least,
or first. Yeah.
Yeah, either way. There's a lot that is very, and that's where like I feel bad commenting on, or I don't feel bad, but I feel like maybe I'm getting the wrong read on the intention of the sort of gay jokes over the course of the story, right? Like that's where I feel like I might be off because the rest of the movie feels progressive enough where it feels like that is not meant to be offensive, but at the same time, the tone of that F word is very hard. I don't know.
I didn't quite get it off of that. It was more the comments from And even then, we know it's because he's jealous to a certain extent. But the comments from Steve about Jane calling her a bull dyke several times.
Oh yeah, that's also true. That's those blacked out.
Those ones are the ones that are a little bit more egregious, and I think it's entirely the coping mechanism of this aging, kind of washed up man who can't get what he wants anymore.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I'd like to think that they're all intentional and therefore they're for more than just shock comedy.
Yes, I would agree. The other part that I would tag in on top of that is that it is, at the very least, when you judge something like this or like a work as a whole, you have to keep in mind that sometimes like a 50-year-old written from a different generation is going to have a different vernacular than the other people that are around him, right? And so he can be an asshole, can be an evil dude, and you shouldn't necessarily put that on the authors directly, unless the point of the movie is also to be spiteful towards, if it's really punching down versus is it exposing a character that has a flaw. Like those are two very different things. Like punching down for punching down's sake versus exposing a man who has a problem or has trouble. It's the same reason that we can talk about Lysander, like in its own right.
Right.
Not to bring that up, but I think it's important because there are a number of stories that might have a character who's homophobic, and that can be a thing inside of the story because they might be an asshole, and that's kind of meant to be character building so that we understand that, oh, they're an asshole. It's not meant to be the author's opinion that people should be homophobic. Like that's not ever what that means.
But you need to build that depth in order to make them a real disliked character.
Right. Potentially. Yeah.
Potentially. Or whatever, whatever it might be.
Use it as shorthand, which could be awful, but yeah, just to put a bow on it. Yeah. Fuck, dude. Mm-hmm. There's so much to talk about with this movie. That's the thing. After watching it, I was like, I didn't expect to have so many opinions and thoughts coming out of it, but in the end, I shouldn't be shocked that I did because it's Wes Anderson, and I'm always left asking more questions about everything.
Yeah. What did you think of, completely shifting gears a little bit here, a lot of it here. What did you think of the score of the film?
I thought it was very interesting to have the guitar guy playing almost the whole time, every scene that he was in, and singing in a different language and doing conventional rock songs in a different language for a lot of it.
They're, I think, all David Bowie.
They are all David Bowie.
And
that's where I was also questioning it.
Is actually performing them.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. He is playing them both in the moment and or otherwise in different scenes. Like when he's in the sound booth, obviously that's probably a recorded, but
I know Life on Mars is one of them.
Life on Mars is actually played. The David Bowie version is played. And then
also
later it's also played in his language, which
Portuguese. It's Portuguese.
I thought it was Portuguese. Okay. I wanted to say it was Portuguese. Because it definitely wasn't French. I could have intuited that. And it wasn't Spanish, but I understood some of the words. Close. So I was like, yeah, exactly. I raised an eyebrow at the whole thing. I really liked it. I didn't realize that it was all David Bowie. I knew that several were.
I think it might not be entirely, but I know of a lot of it.
I don't know enough Bowie is kind of the reality of that too, where it's like, I know enough Bowie, but I do not know the breadth of Bowie. It did immediately when I heard the Man on Mars, I immediately went and turned on the Trent Reznor Watchmen rendition, which is my favorite rendition of that song. It's a very light, acoustic, soft, kind of pillowy rendition that I love. I think it ends like episode 7 or 8. It's one of my favorite things. It's actually not on the vinyl soundtrack because they didn't get physical reproduction rights for that song. It was also the last thing that they did for the entire thing because they didn't think that they were going to get rights to it. And so it was done like 2 weeks before release. So
gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, random side fact that does not matter.
But we've got the acoustic Pele, who's also the safety guy, which is why immediately when you texted me like 3 minutes into the film, you're like, I know I'm going to like the safety guy, and it's Pele. And that's why my response was, I think you're really going to like the score of the film.
Not only did I love that the safety guy in every scene was the most incompetent person, which is, again, what's so funny, and where I get back to the film metaphor is that if we're looking at a film crew, which is, these guys are also made out to be a film crew immediately for the documentary, but it's kind of mocking the safety people on film crews intentionally, saying like, yes, they might have the equipment, but they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They're off doing jack all elsewhere.
He's playing guitar the entire fucking time.
In and of itself, that's not fully inclusive of everyone that does safety in films, but also it's clearly poking fun from a director's perspective from what he's noticed on sets.
And I think to drive that point home even further, there's a line that I quote all the fucking time, and I'm sure you know it. It's, "Who's the shit is Kingsley Zissou?"
Yeah.
And they're talking about who's on watch. And it's Pele, the safety guy, and Ned.
Yeah, Kingsley Zissou. Yeah.
Kingsley Zissou. And Ned doesn't show up for watch, and he's the only one that gets blamed for the pirates showing up, because Pele's there playing guitar the entire fucking time.
He doesn't even hear him. Oh,
He's sitting against the wall of the ship, looking into the ship. He's not looking outside.
Facing just the wrong way. And like there are guns pointed at him as they're like coming on the ship, and they're like, and he just,
But nobody ever blames him for it. Like he never takes any blame. I love it.
Just like he takes no blame for the death of Esteban right off the bat, right? Like he throws a fucking full set of gear into the water for no reason, like just some air. Like the fucking back tanks, like I lost it in that moment.
Klaus has to jump in and save Zissou after yelling, like, "Somebody go save him!"
Yeah. It's like, dude, you're the safety guy. You should be the one to go save him. Did you know that? Did you know that you're supposed to do the saving? Did you save? You're the saver, man. I lost it. It is so good. It was so well executed. Pele's character in general was a great time. So many of these minor characters are so well executed throughout this film. The only one that I felt like didn't get quite enough time was Anne-Marie. Just like a little bit. Like I feel like I needed just a little bit more of her pushing back at a different point, maybe to like make but at the same time she represents the interns and like the right of people to walk out, and that also makes sense. Like it just felt like a little bit more would have gone a long way. This is
even more of the interns would have been fun too.
Yeah. Matthew Gray Gubler, who plays a lead role on Criminal Minds, plays the intern that sticks around, who gets like the axe in him and stays, or the knife or whatever. And that's just really funny to me. I was like, I think I know him, and then I saw his name in the credits, and I was like, oh fuck, it's the Criminal Minds guy. All right, sweet. And I was just like, oh, this must have been like early work for him to some degree, because he's in kind of a bit comedy part, which is just cool. It was a cool scene to see, cool thing to see.
So, taking it back to relationships, but not quite sexual ones, we get a sort of notable shift in the relationship with Ned, from primarily being one of appearances for the sake of the film, and just kind of he wants a father-son relationship for the film, but he doesn't want to be called dad because that's too real and whatever, to a very genuine relationship, I feel like. And there's kind of a subtle hint that that's changed in the moment, there's a couple moments that kind of play into it. He's talking to Jane and he's swearing, and she says something about effing instead of fucking. And he asks, why can't you just curse like normal people? And the reason is because she wants to get out of the habit before delivering her fucking baby. And later, Steve kind of parrots this, censoring himself to what the F instead of what the fuck in a certain scene. Yeah. So it was a fun, very, very subtle, and I didn't catch this until this watch through. But what'd you think of sort of his shift in relationship?
The thing that I noticed the most personally in kind of this presentation was, so Steve moved from here on out. He didn't really respect the choice immediately, but he did make changes. I didn't actually notice his self-censoring so much, specifically with the word fuck later in front of his son, Ned, in kind of that identical fashion. However, it did feel like he started to censor himself in front of his son, and in turn started to think of him as more of such, right? Again, Ned's not actually his kid, but he's sort of his found child, and even at the very end, when the proposed, it's super interesting. This is another one of those tiny nuances inside of the film, but when he proposes adoption to Eleanor, that tells me as well that I think Steve was aware that he wasn't his kid the whole time. Right.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't have to propose adoption.
Because he's your child. Why? You don't need to adopt him. He had, and that goes beyond the 30-year-old thing, and I think that's specifically why he asks that, is because he grew to love him like an actual son, and care for him as one, and he wasn't thinking about him like that. He was thinking about that as a means to an end in the beginning, which I think, again, gets kind of back to the movie metaphor thing when we think about it. It's the means to the end is the beginning of the story idea, which is going to be the paycheck at the end of the rainbow. However, he falls in love with the story as he continues onwards, and then is shocked by the way that it turned and changed on him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
it was a fun arc.
Yeah, it's a very fun arc, and I love their relationship, and I love the way that it kind of grows and the way that they get fighty. I love the way that Ned gets fighty in general. And it goes from, when Klaus first slaps him, or does he slap Klaus first? He slaps Klaus.
No, Klaus slaps him.
And then he slaps back, and Klaus says, if you ever do that again, I'll fucking kill you, or something like that.
No. Klaus slaps him.
Yeah.
And they continue the conversation, and he starts walking away. He's like, hey, Klaus, one more thing. If you ever touch me again, I'll kick your goddamn teeth in.
That's it. Okay. Yeah. And then later Ned asserts his dominance by slapping him, and he's like, Klaus shrinks up and becomes a small little turtle of a human. Yeah. Love those moments. Mm-hmm. Kind of funny, very aggressive, but I think Ned's arc is fantastic. It's also him realizing who he is,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Speaking of, do you know what, where Owen Wilson comes from and what his natural speaking accent is? Because this sounded so strangely, specifically natural to me for some reason. I don't know why, but it's weirdly Southern Kentucky is what he says, but I don't know if that's exactly the accent he's giving.
That's interesting. It didn't sound proper Southern, but I do know where he was born. He was born in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
So he is Southern, but I would say that the Kentucky accent felt a little off to me personally, but also everything always feels a little off to me in Wes Anderson movies. So I don't even know how to, some of it feels like he coaches people in a specific direction so that it is wrong inside of being right, because that lends to kind of the uncanniness of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to tell. That's my trouble with Wes Anderson. I don't know. I never know how to read it.
It's fun though.
It's great. I have no problem with it. It's just it's always a question. He is so good at what he does that he also leaves the question in your mouth of did he mean to do that, or am I just picking up on that? Did he mean that? Fuck. Yeah, it's tough, man. I really did like this film though. As stated, not better than Fantastic Mr. Fox for me. Love it, all timer. Accidentally saw the movie when trying to sneak into an R-rated movie instead for the first time. I don't know if you've heard that story or not, but
so the story I heard was of a group of our high school friends trying to sneak into an R-rated movie and buying tickets for Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Correct. The
getting
goats
caught?
movie, the men with goats,
Men Who Stare at Goats.
Men Who Stare at Goats. Yes, that was the movie that we were trying to go see.
And
instead we
nobody was in the Fantastic Mr. Fox theater.
nobody bought tickets to the other movie, and then all of us
is that
filed
what
in
it was?
there. No, but both.
Oh, both.
So not only was there no one in the Men Who Stare at Goats, but there was also no one in Fantastic Mr. Fox. So like we bought all those tickets to go see Fantastic Mr. Fox, and no one was there, and they're like, okay. And then also no one had bought those, and they were like, okay. And so we it was a case of entrapment, basically. But we ended up going and seeing it, and like everyone else was talking and like kind of upset about like seeing this, but I was focused and I loved it, and I didn't know that it was Wes Anderson necessarily at that point. I just really enjoyed it.
I love that movie.
A couple of the friends that I went with really liked it too, but yeah.
I really love that movie.
Timmy, that's actually Timmy. That fucking last name. I'll think of it in a second. Anyway, doesn't matter.
So that's kind of what I've got for like overarching beats and like actual story notes to like go off of. So I'm just going to like kind of bring up some quotes and see where the conversation goes from there.
Absolutely.
So right away, first couple minutes of the film, right after the vignette, right after, if you want to call it that,
the death.
I don't know if it counts as a vignette at that point, because it is what everybody's watching and commenting on. Is it a vignette?
Yeah. Kind of, because it's also real, you know, like that's the other part of it. Like because it is both. It is an in-universe movie, but it is a vignette to us because there's a presentation of events that happened before. So it's almost a flashback if we want to even think about it further. Like this is a flashback that we're being presented through the lens of artistry on behalf of Steve Zissou and team. But
But he talks about wanting to go find the jaguar shark and kill it. And one of the questions from the audience, during which several people are standing up and leaving, like people did not like this film. During this Q&A. But that's an endangered species at best. What would be the scientific reason for killing it? Revenge.
Fun fact, I'm pretty sure I've heard that quote before. And I definitely think that... Did you send that one to me as well?
I brought it up when our like weekly question was about revenge. And I brought up that quote, and I couldn't remember what it was from, and it was from this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I love it.
Yeah, that's so good. You know, I think what's so interesting about the beginning of the movie, right, is in particular, there was we've chatted about this off air, I think more than on air. It might be in some Devil's Cut somewhere, but. We talked maybe very briefly, maybe it was with Tim Pearson actually, about it in the Wrath of Man episode, but about the Snyder Cut just a little bit, and sort of the aspect ratio choices. And all of the Steve Zissou film is filmed in full screen and presented with curtains or with other things obscuring it so that Wes Anderson, inside of the Steve Zissou film, can achieve verticality with his characters so they're standing, occupying most of the frames. So, like, the reason that you might box me in at this angle is so that I look big and imposing over the picture, which includes, like, imposing over wildlife. So, again, I say... aspect ratio is actually a creative choice, and we've just gotten used to a certain medium because that's what we've been presented with from DVDs and marketing standpoints from computers for so long. Like we actually, I'm not standing up for Zack Snyder's choice in the 4:3 format in general, but what I am saying is that I am more okay with movies potentially changing aspect ratio, provided it doesn't sacrifice the viewing experience.
So I saw it a very different way. I saw it more of a fact, or more of the view of, we are watching this movie now in widescreen, but it's taking place in the before times.
You're
not
correct.
Necessarily before. But
what I'm also saying is how it was shot specifically to occupy that space.
That's
so, like,
fair.
not just that the presentation that we're seeing is in widescreen, but the way that it was physically shot to occupy what he knew was going to be that theater screen, right, was intentional, so that on the theater screen, it was not going to be that we see inside of the movie. It was not presented as widescreen on the theater screen, because that would be in a universe correct. Would be to shoot it at widescreen, and then present it on the theater screen at widescreen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Although the movie's also technically dated, like it's technically supposed to probably take place in the 70s.
So
maybe.
The idea is kind of, as far as I can tell, Steve Zissou is kind of supposed to be an amalgamation of like Jacques Cousteau, who shows up in not shows up, but is mentioned in the film.
Yeah, name dropped a couple of times. And
Steve Irwin, who you talked about
right
earlier in this in this episode.
Yep.
So, I mean, obviously both not oceanographic necessarily, but both wildlife personalities. So, and dating before this film was made. When did this come out, and was Steve Irwin still alive?
05. And I would go with no.
I think he was. I think he died in like 2008.
He died in 2006. Yeah, so fair point.
2006. Okay.
Yep. The photo on Wikipedia is of him in 2005. Womp.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we just took a little break for different reasons, but I just looked up the Steve Irwin, Steve Zissou thing. Doesn't exist. That's not the point. But there is a combination of Jacques Cousteau and Steve Irwin that is relevant, and that's Epic Rap Battles of History. So that's where that came from, and that's why that's in my head. So
you know that they're still fucking doing that?
Are they? When did that one come out? I don't think I actually saw it. I think I read about it at one point.
Agreed. I think that I also read about it, or maybe I did see it and I didn't know who Jacques Cousteau was, and I clicked off of it almost immediately, because that sounds also like what I would have done at the time. But yeah, Epic Rap Battles of History A is like a massive brand, of course, that is continuing. The last one, it looks like, was released in June. Ragnar Lodbrok versus Richard the Lionheart.
I don't know either of those.
Now we're just reaching.
Like that seems like such a high school, like our time in high school is like when that was big.
It was more college. Like the first.
Was it more college?
Okay, so in high school there were about 30-ish episodes out, and then in college is really when like the rest aired. So yeah, like college age. So anyway, the point being here is that they are releasing 7 episodes this year. And they released 11 in 2019 and released a bunch of unreleased episodes on my birthday in 2020. What the fuck? Anyway, Epic Rap Battles of History.
Funny.
What a wonderful...
Oh, shit, man.
Tangent. What?
Well, I just did something really dumb.
What did you do?
I have this empty glass where my cocktail was. And throughout the night when I'm listening, like when we're talking, I'll like sip on the melt of the ice cube
as it like melts.
Right before we came back from break, I poured a bunch of rye in there.
Okay. So you just drank all of the rye? Jesus Christ. What's PJ? The problem here is that I can't keep you on the rails.
No,
because you are hosting. No,
I don't think we actually have
but also
that much to go through right now. But
you say that, but I have a whole diatribe to go. I'm just kidding.
All right. So, we've talked about revenge. We've talked about, do the interns get Glocks? They all share one. We talked about that earlier.
Also, once again, cannot understate how funny it is that they are strapped the whole fucking movie. Like, all the time that I'm, like, seeing Klaus run around, I'm like, this fucking ex-bus driver has a Glock strapped to his head,
also,
like his waist.
Klaus is the only one that wears shorts, but they're the same color as all
and
the
his
other
hat
pants.
has a ball on it. Everyone else's hat is, like, regular.
Nobody else's hat matches. Nobody's hat matches. They're all different.
Doesn't everyone have the red hats?
They're all red.
No, but I thought they all had
slightly different. His is the only one with a ball, but like Ned's has like a stoplight on it.
Got it. Okay, oh yeah, you're right. It's got like a stoplight on the ridge. Yep. I recall that. You're right. That's fucking hilarious. I was just paying attention to Klaus's because I noticed the ball, and every time that he turned around, and it just like swung around on the back of his head, and I was like, no, yes,
Yeah.
Willem Dafoe, A, kills everything that he's in.
Absolutely,
B,
he does.
Destroys this role. Is so funny.
It's so good.
Perfectly German.
Is he actually German?
I don't. With a name
His
like
name is
Willem.
Willem.
Yeah, with a name like Willem, that's for
Maybe.
Steam, and I can't get rid of that.
Because I know he doesn't have a German accent in every film he does.
No. No, PJ, you want to know where he's from? Take a stab. I'll give you United States, but like take a stab where in the United States he's from. I'll tell you, I have relatives
Idaho.
that live there.
Wyoming?
Appleton, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Interesting.
Appleton, Wisconsin. Yeah.
Where is Appleton?
Appleton is like north western.
Okay.
My grandparents lived there for a while, and we do have a couple of relatives that live in the area.
Gotcha. So not
near
German, but he does do a German accent really well.
It is like southwest. I was actually totally wrong on the location. It is southwest of Green Bay. Okay. I was thinking there's some other Apple city that's in like the easternish near Hinckley, because I also have family on my mom's side that lives near Hinckley.
Okay.
But yeah, all my dad's family lives in fucking Wyoming. Anyway,
not Germany is the
not
point.
Germany.
But he does a very
Wisconsin.
good job here.
Yeah, an incredible accent that is.
Who's the shit is Kingsley Zissou?
Yeah. Who's this shit? It's all of his lines. Those are the deadpan lines that get me. Is every time Willem Dafoe has to open his mouth is amazing, hilarious, wonderful, fantastic.
Do you recognize me saying that all the time now, by the way?
Who the shit is Kingsley Zissou? I mean, it makes sense now. Like, you say shit like that all the time. You say so many of these lines all the time, so it does make sense in the end. And I do understand why they're quotable, and I do think that it's funny. And I think out of, like I said in the beginning, I think out of most of the Wes Anderson movies, most of them I consider like unrewatchable, because you watch it once, you get the gist of most of it. There might be some minor things that you could pick up on, with the exception of Fantastic Mr. Fox, once again, where credits due. But this is one where I could see like re-enjoying it because of the humor throughout, because this one is laced so directly. Like, this is more of a comedy than a lot of his other stuff.
This is very much a comedy.
A lot of the other stuff uses comedy as a delivery vessel.
Right.
For drama, but
whereas this one has drama and comedy in between it. Like, it doesn't really deliver.
Even the drama is comedic. Like, the whole like,
yeah, you're right.
Like even some of those moments, not all, which is why I said the end is very cathartic. Like, the last 10 minutes of the film, right before you called me, are all very dramatic, cathartic, strong moments, which is what I think it's great to end there.
Which you called me and you're like, I've got maybe 8 minutes left in the film.
Yeah.
Because you were looking at the time and knowing how long credits usually take. You're like, maybe 8-ish minutes. I'm like, you got a lot left.
Well, and you were like,
it
how do you
really
feel about
picks
it? And I
up.
was like, I don't know how I feel about it, because I'm right there at the finish line, and it feels like you could go a couple of ways with this. And it's like, it's one of those moments where it's like, I could really like this based on the end, or I could like be very indifferent to it and even dislike it. But
so I think what you said was, so I think they're about to find the shark based on the fact that they're in the helicopter. Yeah. I'm like, all right. And I like hung up the phone.
It wasn't quite that fast. We talked about some other things.
We did, but like I diverted the conversation because I didn't want to. Yeah.
When you called, though, how did I answer? I answered with exactly what Klaus had just said.
It was, I didn't like it, or I didn't just like it.
Yeah. Ned, I didn't just like it. I loved it. I fucking loved it.
He didn't say I loved it. He didn't say I love it. He just saluted.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. You're definitely right. Man, Klaus is so good, so funny, and there are all those moments, and like also Ned and Klaus's like arc throughout this is wonderful, and the way that they come together as like buds in the end. fucking when Steve like looks at Klaus and they're talking about like A squad, B squad. He's like, you're the leader of B squad. You know that what's his name? Eduardo. It's not Eduardo.
Yeah,
it's
I've got this as one of the quotes. Don't you know me and Esteban
looking at the duck.
always thought of you as our baby brother? I've always thought of you two as my dads.
My dads. It's so funny.
Don't let the others make fun of me for saying that.
Yeah. It's so good. That quote is A, genius, but B, Klaus's character makes so many befuddling lines like that, like says so many things, and Klaus's character in general is befuddling, again, because this man, of whom is an ex-bus driver, carries around a Glock and is bossing people around on this boat.
What's his position on the boat? I can't even remember.
I don't fucking know.
I don't know.
He's a fucking nightmare. I love Klaus.
So
deeply.
A character that I love, and he's quite sparse throughout the film.
Yeah.
But hilarious every time is Bill. You're a Bond company
Bill
stooge.
Is very funny.
Well, I'm also a human being.
He's like the opposite of what you'd consider like most accountants in most things. Like he's like, guys, like I'm real. I'm a legit person. I know that I do math. I know that I'm the fuck. But like, consider the fact that like maybe you don't want to kill me. God, Cody the dog too is so funny throughout the entire thing. Like all of the jokes, like okay, not all of the jokes. There's one joke about Cody that's very bad, wherein fucking Alistair,
be still Cody,
fucking asshole, the Mick Goldblum hits him with the. I'm so glad that cuts away so hard, because it's very clear that they cut and move the dog. Like,
but it's also clear that is the one thing that makes us not like him at all.
That like seals the deal. Like he's made several uncouth gay jokes. He's also been the recipient of a couple of uncouth gay jokes, and then on top of that, he fucking hits the dog, and you're like,
fuck this guy.
Cody didn't even ask to be here. He was left, and we adopted Cody into this little Belafonte family, and you fucking hit him with your newspaper, you ass. I have nothing but...
So
I was angry.
Combining the two of these points between Bill and Alistair, their meeting later on. How'd you guys get my espresso machine? We fucking stole it, man.
And I love how it like clicks in his head, and at the same time he's like, I'm just going to take the insurance money. And like you can see him like work it out as he's walking away.
As the camera's panning away to the other scene.
Exactly. And he's just like, he's thinking about it, and he's like, yeah, I'm not gonna do anything about that. Fair point. I thought it was the pirates. I already blamed the pirates. I can't go back on this. I thought there's so many different components of that are so good. Also, all the machinery that they stole from him, like blowing up variously when they like need it to work, when they're doing like film editing and stuff like that. Also great, where it's like, oh, your money didn't buy you the best thing. There's a line too. It's in that same line when he hits Cody. By the way, there's a I've heard several diatribes recently on character building about like killing someone doesn't hurt people, most regular people, as emotionally as like hitting an animal does. And so if you really want to like create a villain, like often the sort of depravity that it would take a human to like lower themselves to beat an animal is worse than like killing a person.
So that plays into the film about filmmaking kind of deal, because it's so stark and so sudden.
Correct. But specifically, one of the things that I really like is when Alistair quotes him what it's going to take to repair the ship. He's like, that's more than the budget for the whole project. And he's like, it's a quote. He says, like, and that to me is like, it again gets back to that whole metaphor that we were just talking about. It is that like seeking producer thing. And then on top of that, it's like, okay, so we went to the VFX company to like fill out these VFX shots, and they said it was going to cost this. And that's outrageous. And then the guy, like the salesman for the VFX company comes back and he's like, it's just a quote, don't worry about it. Like, just sign the button, and then you could pay for it later and deal with it later. And that to me is just another round of profundity and hilarity within this movie. Is so good.
Changing gears. Actually, tangentially related. Within the Hennessy headquarter, or not, offshore base, Pele saying to Pele and Anne-Marie's conversation of, do you know what this is? Like, Anne-Marie's holding a map, and she's very concerned about it, and he looks at it, Pele does, looks like a map, and like walks away. But it's her like realizing that they're about to cross into uncharted waters, which is, or not uncharted, unprotected waters, where pirates run amok. But just that, do you know what this is? Looks like a map is so fucking funny to me.
All of the women are the only competent people
Absolutely.
in the entire story. And I also think that
Absolutely.
is fantastic. And it speaks volumes to the rest of the story and sort of the ignorance and like the, oh man, I love that
They
the rest
say
of the crew,
They say Eleanor is the brains of Team Zissou. But what are you, Steve? He's the Zissou.
It's so unfortunate because you can imagine that like it's like he's the star power, like he's the big deal here,
And we're like, taking that quote at face value is funny, but doesn't mean that much. But putting that point on it, that he has charisma, he has star power, he's
the marketable
fan
element,
base.
like he is
exactly. It makes sense there. But I think it was meant to be more of the, like, he's the Zissou.
It's a pull your heart out moment to me, man. Like that
really
sucks.
is.
Like it is like both. It is confounding because you also you want the very smart people to also be the ones who are recognized for their work and contributions, right? Like
Yeah.
it's the smartest kid in the group project, and then like the lazy kid who ends up presenting it in the end, and like the presenter always gets the credit for the work that was done in the back end instead of the group project, right? So in the end, who's better off in life generally? Generally, it's Eleanor. Like all the time, as proven by this movie, it's Eleanor. Eleanor has won so many times throughout this movie because she's the smart one, not the marketable one.
Right.
And
So-
yeah. But I don't want to skip over Anne-Marie real quick. Anne-Marie's line there is fantastic. And I think I think that was the moment when I like came to realize that it was like, yes, she's the scriptwriter for an unscripted documentary, which is, and then it all connected for me. I'm like, oh, she's just collecting a paycheck, which is hilarious because she has outsmarted all of the men on this production and is no longer willing to risk her life. And that's why she leaves. And I was like, fuck yes, Anne-Marie.
It's why she leaves, but also why she gets to just hang out and like suntan the entire fucking time.
Exactly, because she's the script writer, and the fucking Steve does whatever the fuck he wants. Like no one's following a script.
Like they're following. Steve is thinking of things that sound good, absolutely in the moment. Like, it's so good. But also
that one.
by the way,
I rewatched the first 15 minutes when we were done, so that I could like catch some of these things. And I was like,
it's so
perfect.
good.
That
it's
is
so
genius.
good.
Yeah.
It's I think that quote I brought up, and I might have misquoted it a little bit because I don't have it actually written down, but I think that's the only thing we hear Esteban actually say, right? Like, I think that's his only line is he's the Zissou.
That might be. I think you're right.
Which it makes sense because he dies fucking immediately underwater.
Right. But wait, does he ask that on camera with Eleanor there?
No, that's another kind of vignette. It's them.
Okay, like a semi. Yeah. Okay.
In an interview, kind of almost like night show sort of style interview.
Yeah. So much of that movie, the like first hour, not even the first hour, like the first 45 minutes blurs in a lot of ways. One of the things that we haven't actually talked about a whole lot is a lot of the camera work in this is ingenious and very indicative of Wes Anderson style, specifically the way that like the ship is cut in half and presented that way, and like the camera follows them as they move, but also it doesn't ever try to deceive us in the fact that we're staring at a set the whole time. Like it is very clear that it is like moving up the edge, and you can see it kind of like you would a play, like in the same way that you'd be presented watching a play. You see the set of the ship. Until there are a couple of scenes where they'll be like walking upstairs, and then all of a sudden it'll cut to like the upstairs, like the full ship in 3D from a different angle. Happens specifically when like Steve and Ned confront each other is one of the examples that I remember. And then Jane shows up. That moment, that scene. With the punching. Yeah.
So let's bring that quote up.
The ring. I'm sure it's the ring quote.
No. It's you never say, "I'm going to fight you, Steve." You just smile and act natural, and then you sucker punch him. You fight your way, and I'll fight mine.
Yeah, and then he punches him back, right? Like just shortly thereafter,
when he's like responding
wrong. Yeah, which is like, yes, the son did learn very quickly. That's funny. I remember when he gets punched and he's got a fat lip and he's like, "Oh, I think you got me with your ring."
Yeah, your Zissou Society ring caught me in the lip.
Zissou Society. Like how many S's can we get inside of?
Which also, we know he got that ring as an 11-year-old.
Yes. 11 and a half specifically. That's important.
It is
because of later.
Important later. But actually not really, because when I rewatched it, when he got that like letter, he was 12.
Sorry. You're actually right. He got the letter when he was 12. It happens 11 and a half years later. Like the scene with Jane happens 11 and a half years later, and he is 12 when she's talking in the postscript, or like the scene with Jane and Kid happens when he is 12.
Yeah.
There's something specific about that. I do not remember the perfect intricacies.
The kid
but it's
was
meant to, because it was 6 months to term inside of her over the course of the story. Originally, it was earlier, and then as the story progresses, the only real measure of time that we have is her pregnancy and her like stomach increasing. That is the only measure of time, which we haven't talked about at all. But regardless, I digress.
Either way,
sorry. I moved us off of the topic that we were talking about, which was the punching.
No, this is the point of like these quotes, is to like go off on cons. It does, because there's no real like. There's obviously a through line, and it is chronological for the most part, other than the notes.
Couple of flashbacks at the beginning.
The flashback things, but the story structure is very loose.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what I was saying right at the beginning of this episode too, is that the story structure is very loose, but also it tries to be too tight. It tries to be too direct and tight at times, so it doesn't let some of that like looseness pervade itself over the course of the story.
Mm-hmm.
If that doesn't perfectly make sense, but if you're drinking at home, you can probably follow me. If you're not drinking at home, I don't know if you'll perfectly understand what I was going for. Instead, I will try to rephrase. The reason that I think vignettes do better in some of Wes Anderson's later work is because his through line is generally weaker, but more direct, with a ton of scattered scenes, versus this seems to have a spine through it that tries to move us along each of the different ribs attached to the spine. But
does he usually have a co-writer? Or
in this one, he does.
I know he does
in general.
Not in general. Okay.
Not in general. No, there's
that makes sense.
I think his most frequent co-writer is Noah Baumbach, and I think it's only on the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, again, very unique dude, very unique thing that he's going for. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Royal Tenenbaums was co-written with Owen Wilson.
Okay.
Rushmore was totally Wes Anderson.
That's the other thing. Wes Anderson has a very select few like loved actors. Owen Wilson is absolutely one of them. Bill Murray is one of them.
Everything. Yeah.
Who else? There's a few others that are in More
Edward
than two.
Norton and
Edward
Frances
Norton is one
McDormand.
of them. Yep.
She's in a lot of the later stuff, I should say. Tilda Swinton, too, because I think she's also in Isle of Dogs, if I remember
think so.
correctly.
I think so.
She plays a character. I would say that basically as we move later in the in the filmography of Wes Anderson, he's written more things by himself, but earlier on he had a co-writer or a person to touch up once or twice. But yeah, I mean, needless to say, he's it's good. It's good. I will forever feel betrayed, though, that Fantastic Mr. Fox lost the Academy Award for Best Feature.
I think it should have. I think who beat it?
I want to say that it was a
what,
Pixar film.
2010
2010 was when the film. So it was released in 2009. 2010 is when it happened.
Okay.
It lost to Up, which is acceptable actually, but also
I like it better than Up.
Let's consider that it's other so the three things it's important to consider when you're thinking about, it's not ranked choice voting or anything like that. Of course, it's just predominantly the votes are the votes. But Up, Coraline, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. All three of those are fantastic movies. Up is probably my favorite or second favorite Pixar movie.
Honestly, I think of the three of those, Up is my last choice.
Maybe.
I don't like Up
maybe
as much as a lot of people do.
Up is emotionally devastating, and it's a cheap shot. The whole movie is a cheap shot.
It's not, though.
Oh my God, you are heartless.
No,
you would cry.
There's one emotional shot of that guy's wife died.
Correct, but then the entire story is about him being a grumpy old man and trying to reclaim that innocence that he had as his youth. It's about like the reverse of the loss of innocence. It's about the gaining of innocence.
I'm not saying it's a bad film. I enjoy it. I really like the film. I think Coraline's better. And I think Fantastic Mr. Fox is better than Coraline.
Both of those are adaptations, too, which is interesting. Fantastic Mr. Fox being a Roald Dahl. And, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Coraline being a Neil Gaiman. But, yeah, doesn't matter. Anyway.
Either way.
Point being, Steve Zissou. Zeus.
He says it a lot. It's Zissou.
I know it's Zissou. I'm just
in the film.
Around.
It is definitely Zissou.
It is most definitely Zissou. I'm just messing around. God, I really enjoyed this whole thing. I don't know how else to even like think about it. What other quotes do you have?
So, are those hijackers? Well, out here we call them pirates, Ned.
That is funny, specifically because Ned would call them hijackers because obviously he's a pilot, and that would be the thing. But yeah, man, genius line. Give it its due.
And it brings up the one that I think is funnier after the entire incident with the pirates. And one of the pirates died because Steve shot him. Wrap this stiff in a tablecloth. We're going to bury him at sea. Shouldn't we, give him to the authorities or something? No. And Klaus says, I'll write up some words to say over him.
The thing specifically that I love about that funeral scene is obviously the words being said over him and everything like that. But then
it's Corinthians of some sort.
Yes, well, it's played for humor, right? Like that moment is played for humor, and like the burial at sea thing, and it's like, oh, this actually happens, right? And like that's okay, but it's like it's not real, right? Like we're all kind of like joking about it, and then we lose Ned. And it becomes a much more serious burial at sea, in which he has a coffin.
He has a coffin, and also there's a bunch of Air Kentucky pilots.
Yes,
in present.
But why the sea burial? Is it because he died at sea? Is that like why they're choosing? Because then it's like they don't have to take care of the body. Like there are a couple of questions there that exist, and they don't need to be answered necessarily, but it does lend dramatic weight to like the idea of the burial at sea.
Well, because I think it's because Steve says that's what he would have wanted.
He does say that, yeah.
And ultimately, we don't know Ned's disposition truly, but we know it through the frame of Steve.
And regardless of Steve's actual parentage to Ned, Steve was a father figure to Ned growing up through the Steve Zissou Society. Like, I'm just thinking about that too. Like the important there. Like even if Steve would have told him the facts, like
in the letter to Steve, it was A, oceanographer, B, something I can't remember, and C, pilot. Like he wanted first and foremost to be an oceanographer as a kid.
Yeah.
So I am happy with the way they did his funeral, but I can see there being some questionable choices, and who made those choices for Ned.
And overall, I don't feel like it is. It's not something that we should like sit and interrogate and question, but it does pose, at the very least, if he knew the reality, what would he have wanted versus the reality that Steve's interpreting in his head. Although I think Steve, by the end of this, is much more clear-minded after Ned dies than anything else. And I think that he ultimately made the correct choice, and I think that's also showing Steve's growth. Like, so long way about it, I think that Steve made the right choice, and I think that Steve and Ned were actually more connected on what he would have wanted in the end.
Do you also assume that Steve knows that he's shooting blanks?
Yeah. I think we made a point earlier about that like he was
we
aware
talked about
that,
it from Eleanor's perspective. We didn't talk about it from Steve's perspective.
I think I made mention of something, again, very Wes Anderson-y maybe, where it was tucked in like a single line, but I think that Steve was aware that he could not father children.
He does a good job of hiding that, though.
Yes, and I think that that's a part of it, because he says a line, I think, I can't remember. I made mention of it earlier in the show. I know that I did. But anyway, the point being, I do think that he's at the very least aware of it, and like kind of tragically aware of it. Like he doesn't want to admit that he's the problem inside of his and Eleanor's relationship. So he chooses to instead ignore it and play Playboy and like continue to try to play Playboy.
That's the point of the it's worse than fucking shit. I can't remember the term again.
The like her saying like the 34-year-old joke. I think that's both of them admitting it to each other that they knew that it was the other person's fault. Yeah, which I think is also when I made this point originally.
Okay.
Is when we brought up that quote. But yeah, because I think that he's saying that, and it's like he knows and she knows, and then they continue to be together despite those things.
There's also the fact that several different points throughout this movie, they talk about like, they ask people if there's familial resemblance, and nobody says yes.
Like, yes, that's interesting.
Even Zissou says, I don't see it. Which, that seems weird to me. That's the one that seems weird to me. Like, him trying to convince himself that he's not his father because there's no familial resemblance.
I don't think that he's trying to convince himself. I think that he's trying to say it for other people's sake because no one else believes it. Steve's a faker. Like, Steve is in and of himself a faker for most of the story. So like, he's faking it because he also is going along with everyone else's opinion, you know? I think that also speaks to like generally his direction style of documentaries that we don't see, is like he's been going with like people's opinion of what he should do when we see some of those reviews and the signatures on the old films versus like something that's real and honest, which is what this final, project ends up being.
Right.
Which I think lends to an interesting point in and of itself, but
it does.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next quote though.
Yeah.
If you're not against me, don't cross this line. If yes, do. And then Klaus steps forward.
He's like, no, Klaus. he says,
No,
he says,
are you sure?
Yeah, that's.
Are you sure?
I'm with you. And then he
Yes,
says, like,
I
I'm
am.
with you. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, that's what it is. Fuck, it's why. Oh man.
And he's like, and he said, "What are we doing here? Cross this line if you're gonna quit." Oh, do it again. I misunderstood.
I misunderstood.
Which,
my bad.
Understandably, that's a really fucking confusing line with a lot of double negatives.
And Zissou was intending to confound because no one else understood, right? Like, no one else crossed the line when they should have. Like, Anne-Marie and a lot of the interns ultimately crossed the line when he clarifies with simple language.
Except for one.
Yeah, except for, that's why I said, yeah. But yeah, so like ultimately the reason that he pitched it that way is so that it was confuddling, so that they would stick around because they didn't know that they had a choice to leave. And then all of a sudden Klaus's fuck up gives them an excuse to leave the ship. Because he has to put it in plain English and actually explain himself as opposed to burying it in his shit. Yeah.
I don't know if it was even that.
I think it was because everyone else was like looking around. I rewound that scene twice because I was curious about that one.
So bring it into context of later where he's talking to Jane, who wasn't upstairs at the time because she was packing to leave.
Yeah, as well.
Where he refers to it as like a tearjerker and the most emotional shit that he would have given her the entire time. I think he genuinely thought he was being genuine and emotional there, even though it was just floundering and horribly like confusing dialogue. I don't think he was intending for it to be confusing. I think he just doesn't know how to actually speak.
I think you might be correct, actually. In hindsight, I think that is actually probably the correct read, is that he didn't know that he was being deliberately confusing. But on top of that, it also points out that whenever Steve speaks, he is confusing. Like
he's trying to be eloquent and doesn't know how to be.
It's confuddling. Yeah.
Like, it's not wrong. What he said was correct. It was just a lot of double negatives.
Yeah.
Like, logically dissecting it makes grammatical sense.
Correct, but you have to work your way out of all of the double negatives inside of the sentence in order to make it there, which is why it feels like it's, right. But when he puts it in plain English, they're like, oh, yeah, I know what I want.
No, I'm crossing the fucking line. Fuck you.
Right. I loved in general when he drew the line in the first place. I was like, what the fuck are you doing, dude? And he drew it in such an odd place too, like in front of those like two things, like also to make it uncomfortable. This is why I think that it's just a tish deliberate, is because of where he put the line and then the way that he speaks, because you could have put the line back further from like the fucking things that are like the vents that are popping out for the lower decks there. But yeah, A or B doesn't really change that much. So yeah. Oh man, fucking.
So I think there's only one, or there's two quotes that we didn't directly address earlier, and one that we tangentially did, which was, I suppose we could sew an N on the side of that octopus. When Ned was talking about the new flag and didn't have himself included there.
Yeah.
Which was so beautiful. I loved it. I loved the way they did that entire scene.
It's very sweet because Klaus is also like, you belong inside of this family, despite their like bullying relationship that had been going on for a long time. Like they're like co-bullying each other thing, which is fucking hilarious. But then on top of that, like everyone else being like everyone else that was around, which I think is just Steve and
it's Steve, Klaus, and Ned.
Okay, and
because
Steve,
the other person
head, like yeah, like
the other person involved is Esteban, who's gone
right on the flag itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the other component that I really love about that emotional scene with the flag is the moment that happens after he dies, right? Like after when we realize that we can turn the flag and it's a different letter, right? And that it still represents him regardless.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts. Like that was a genuine like ouch sound that you heard there. An emotional ouch sound.
It's interesting that he put N instead of K though.
I think that's also him admitting, truth in the name.
That's fair.
But then in the end, the name that's presented in the credits of the movie, like in the credits of the documentary, is Ned Kingsley. Neither the last name before nor Zissou's name, a name that he himself maybe earned in addition to his first name.
Yeah.
Because you get in the credits of the film, it's Ned Kingsley. So it's like, what do we make of that choice to like combine the names as opposed to taking the name,
And there's only
Kentuckian
one
name.
line in the entire film that calls him Edward, which is his actual name.
Yeah, when he explains his name, right?
When he's talking to Jane.
Or is it when he writes it on the letter?
No, Jane learns that he changed his name.
Yes.
And
yeah, that's right.
And he
right.
says Edward Kingsley.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. She's like, that's way better. Keep that name.
Agreed. So I have a question here, specifically relating to kind of the name thing and some of the details that go along around with Ned. Is the letters, all of the letters that are pre-stamped, are they also pre? I didn't understand the letters. That's
the
what I didn't understand.
Correspondence stuff.
Yes, all of the like stack of letters that he had inside of the thing that he was asking her to take care of for him. That's what I didn't understand.
So my thought was, so whenever they wanted to on the ship, they could write a letter and have it sent off.
Okay. All right.
That's not contextually relevant anywhere, but that was my kind of.
That would be one of those things that I think that I would
it.
try to pay a lot of attention to in a follow-up watch. Would be specifically relating to why the letters. Yeah. Anyway, that was just a tangential thought.
If you want to get even deeper into it without any sort of backup claim,
context,
it's the only thing that he's ever been given by Steve.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Although he did get his hat and Speedo.
Oh,
of which we see no one's Speedo throughout the whole thing, which is fucking hilarious.
He doesn't.
Right? Like
he doesn't ever. He does wear a Speedo. He wears it in the sauna or in the hot tub.
Oh, Steve does. Yes. All that I was saying is
doesn't Owen also, or doesn't Ned also at one point?
Maybe.
You
might be right.
I might be wrong. Also, I can't remember.
Also, I like how they never specify that they all should order the same style of shirts. Like it's a Speedo and a hat, but everyone has identical shirts on.
Well, so
of the crew,
we do get a comment on that, like
the pajama shirt.
When Steve walks into the room with Ned and Jane, Ned starts putting on the shirt, and he says, "Don't you fucking put on that uniform." So it is it is a uniform issued to him.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, it's just not a part. It's just not listed mentioned in the order that they do for everything else. Okay, that makes sense.
It's just not mentioned.
Right. That checks out.
But still kind of funny.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So we mentioned the gunshot of the quote of "Stephen, are you rescuing me?" I fold, and Allie gets shot.
Mm-hmm.
So we've gone through that conversation, but
great scene.
I suppose I could sew an N on the side of that octopus. I think we just talked about.
We just did. Yeah, we hit that one.
So the last one I've got is, I still wish I could breathe underwater. Me Too, Ned. Which to me was like the most heartfelt part of this film. I loved this quote.
It does feel like that admittance, because it's specifically after Steve presents the old letter with the mosquito that he named after him, right? Like the Zissou gnat,
I still kept
whatever
mine too.
Yeah, I still kept mine too. The original letter, because he kept the correspondent, he kept the receiving. Ned kept the letter that he got from Steve, and Steve also kept the letter from Ned.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting because that is maybe the most difficult choice to parse. But again, it could also be like that it's just so important to him that like he does keep all of like the fan mail that he gets because he actually does appreciate the position that he's in.
I don't think that's the case. I
But
think it was
why just Ned's
specifically
then? Because of the like
because of
zoology
his
aspect.
No, because of the connection to his mother. Even if he knows he's not his son, it's still a past relationship that he's holding on to. Potentially.
Yeah.
It's something more than just a fan.
I feel like I would disconnect it from the mom a little bit, because I feel like my mom met you is not the same as like, and again, like a kid's not going to know the difference. And so there's a lot of like stuff in there. Yeah. Have to figure that out.
Yeah.
But I think
that'd be a couple views specifically trying to parse that out, I think.
I think specifically, though, the one thing that I want to talk about in relation to the letter is, so the choice here, rather not the choice, but the reason that I think that Steve kept that letter, that final letter, is because he lists off the careers that he wants to do, and he puts Steve's career inside of that list. Like, he values that. And so Steve's like, I've inspired someone else. And so like keeps that in his own head, and that's why he keeps the letter, in addition to his own, maybe at the time, like nascent idea of like, oh, this kid named a gnat after me and like caught a gnat and mailed me a gnat. Like, that's so cool.
But we do also know, we know that Steve knows this kid's mom.
Yeah.
And we know that this kid's mom told him at his birth that he was the father. We know that he was told that.
Yeah.
Even if it's not true, we know that he thinks that's true, or it was told that that's true. It's not necessarily
so tough to parse. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Again,
it's a lot to parse.
Like, I want to try to thematically separate this just a little bit. What I'm trying to say is that when he received the letter originally, when he like received the letter, it was a vain thing. He liked it because of vanity for one reason or another, be it the fact that like the kid called out that he was an oceanographer, or be it that like a mosquito gnat was named after him, the Zissou, right? However, I think in the end, the reason that he comes around to the letter and realizes that it's even more important could be because of the childhood connection, the mom connection, and those things. But I would instead maybe posit, without doing the research on the former, say that it could also be that he is leveraging this as an emotional resonance to be like, I realized long ago that you were more important to me, regardless of whether or not you were my kid, because you recognized your appreciation for what I actually tried to do. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
the mom thing can play into that. That's like an additional aspect to it, or potentially a counter aspect. But at the very least, I think it's vanity at the beginning. It's love by the end.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Which I think is also the way that you can view the two documentaries that were given, right? Like the beginning one is vanity that ended in tragedy, and then the later one is instead tragedy, but like real love.
Yeah, I'm with you. Do you have anything else that you want to cover?
You can also sum up most
about?
Wes Anderson films as white people problems very easily.
I'm sure you can. Yeah.
That was it. That was the final point. That was all.
That's fair.
No, I honestly, dude, I really enjoyed the movie. Glad that we watched it. Glad that we got to talk about it. Glad that finally came around to watching the whole thing, because I've seen bits over the years, which is why I've always said that, like, I've seen Life Aquatic and I know enough about it, but like I've never watched the whole thing. And so it was nice to finally like see the entire movie and kind of understand. Because I remember walking in when my parents were watching it for like 20 minutes and like walking out, because walking into the middle of this movie is confounding. There's no way you can understand it.
So
yeah,
after spending 2 hours dissecting it, do you still like it? What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
What give a like in this moment? What are your thoughts on the film?
All right. So I've spent a lot of time over the course of the last week listening to a video gamer review tons of fucking different video games in depth for 5 hours at a time per game. This guy's fucking nuts. His name's Action Button. He previously ran a website and gave things like out of 4-star reviews, gave half stars, things like that. I came up with my own rating system while I was listening to this guy, and I was like, this is maybe my time to deploy it. PJ, what number do I never give things?
7.
I never give 7s. Why do I not give 7s?
Because it's the go-to, I don't love this, but I don't dislike this kind of point. Like it's the bullshit point.
I've settled on a 3-star rating system. I've settled that 2-star is good, 3-star is best, 1-star is okay. And like, if you like that kind of thing, you might like it. And 0-star is I do not recommend to anyone. Does that make sense?
So it's a 4-star system.
But like, we have to keep in mind that like 0 exists, right? Like 4-star systems are effectively 5-star systems if you think about it that way. But
yeah, it's a 5.
We just
it's
have
a
to
4.
yeah,
it's
right.
a 4-point system.
Yes, 4-point system is probably the way to put it. But the max score is 3. So, so I would give this movie a solid 2. I would say that it is not my favorite. It is not one of the best movies, but I would recommend it more often than most. It's close to a 1 only because I think I could only recommend it to some people. However, I like it enough to recommend it to people that I know would like it.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally fair.
All right. Glad that you're able to explain my rating system. Now I've got a new one.
That's good. That's great. For whatever reason, this spoke to me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw it at a very impressionable time in my life. Freshman in college is when I first saw it. So I think that probably plays into the reason why I like it so much. But at the same time, it holds up for me seeing it now. After all those changes and all those like life updates, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am a very big fan of deadpan humor. So this perfectly falls into that respect. So, you know, I don't know. I love it, but I completely respect your 2.
Yeah. I think, again, 2 out of 3 is not at all bad. That's a great score. It's not, again, my 3s are reserved for the films that I like the most. That's a Looper. That's a Rogue One. That's so
are you
3s.
Are you giving yourself the option for 2.5? Or are you
I'm
just
not even touching that until I want to. And then I'm going to do, the reason that I have 3 stars is because even with half stars, PJ, it's only 9. You see that? You see how I did that? Like, I removed 7 effectively with a 3-star system, even with the halves.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought about this for a long time.
I know you did. I'm sure you did.
I was like, if I decide to actually publish and run by this ranking system, it would abide by all of my rules. Yeah. I thought about it for a while. Anyway.
All right. Well, with that, let's wrap this shit up. This was PJ's Symposium of Media and Whimsy. We have discussed Wes Anderson's The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou for the last 2 hours or so. And I love that you are here to listen for it. So next month, right now, what we're deciding to do is the mini series of Chernobyl from HBO. So I think we're going to do it segmented in a sort of way. And that will
it's going to be
Yep.
It'll be presented very differently than the typical episode format for this show. What we settled on doing, because we both watched some of the episodes, we both have feelings about individual episodes, is instead we are going to deliver, in addition to our normal weekly podcast, a 30 to 40 minute episode breakdown show weekly to you from PJ's Symposium, covering each of the individual Chernobyl episodes, and then a wrap up on the series in post, including a lot of the behind the scenes things, etc.
So this might last more than next month.
This will cover December and January.
Yeah.
It's not might, it will.
It will.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next 2 months will be weekly or slightly more than weekly. Slightly less than weekly, I guess.
It'll be weekly. It will be weekly. I will ensure that they're released once a week, regardless of how often you and I record the episodes. So
I am thinking about our recording schedule.
Yes. Yeah, not thinking about the recording schedule. Thinking about the release schedule. These will be released weekly.
Yep. So the next 2 months will be weekly short form episodes of the Symposium covering Chernobyl, which I like this a lot better because I was really dreading. I think it's a better
approach to it. Yeah.
I was dreading the idea of us breaking down the entire miniseries as a single episode. So
it was going to be such an overstated nightmare to think about it that way. And I'm glad, again, I think that a big point of this is we have to keep ourselves within our time constraint because we don't want to demand from both of our regular shows, like our regular podcast and that an additional 4 hours a week of people's time. That's insane.
So,
but if we keep this one tight,
I will guarantee that Cross and I will be there for every episode. I can't say the same for Tolson, who I want to be there as much as possible because he loves this as much as I do. But I can't guarantee he'll be there for every single episode. I absolutely want him to be, though.
Yeah, everyone that he can make, we'll definitely have on. Although I think that will also extend the runtime, which isn't problematic. It'll be a grand time. Yep. Cool. All right. Well, this was great. Really glad that you showed me this movie.
This was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Ultimately, are you happy that I showed you this movie?
Yes, I am very happy that I watched this movie today. I'm only a little upset that I had to divide it kind of into 2 chunks because of everything else going on today. But it was a short chunk of 20 minutes at the beginning and then a long chunk of the rest of the movie. So yeah.
Sounds good. Well, I will see all of you next month.
Same. And on Thursday.
Well,
with the regular show.
You know that already.